Hey guys, John back with another AntiGuru video, and today's AntiGuru video comes from the office. We've moved back, we're back in our home here in Portsmouth, and oh boy is it nice to be back. It's new permitted development video day, and to be fair, this one's exciting because we've been predicting this for a long time. We've been waiting for it to happen and waiting for it to happen, and now it has happened, and it's happened in the order that we were expecting it to happen in. So it is the 2 flats above flats airspace PD that we're talking about in just a few moments. Whilst the trailers are running, like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you in a minute. Right, new permit development day. Really looking forward to talking to you guys about this one. I've got my head around it. I've got an idea of what to talk about. I've got a script. We actually have a script today because this one is big and complicated and the most locked down permitted development right I have seen in a long time. So we're talking about the new Part 20, the new permitted development right for airspace above existing blocks of flats. This one's exciting, I think. This one's very cool, and I'm really looking forward to going through it with you. So bear with me whilst we just go with it and see where things go. So as I said, this is a new PD right. It's a new PD right, and it's coming forward on the 1st of August. That's when it's getting put in to the General Permitted Development Order in a whole new part, Part 20. We had 19 parts, now we have 20 parts. Train running behind me adds authenticity. I'm definitely back at the office. So this PD right is for purpose-built blocks of flats, detached purpose-built blocks of flats. Our first restriction comes in right in the description. It is for detached purpose-built blocks of flats, and what it's there to do is add 2 stories of additional accommodation on top of detached purpose-built blocks of flats. But there are so many restrictions in this. Before the gold rush occurs, let's really understand the model, the type of property this is focusing in on. So you're allowed to do, as part of this, engineering operations necessary to construct the additional stories, works to replace, and the word is replace, existing plant and equipment that may have been found on roofs, works for the construction of appropriate access for the new dwellings, and works for the construction of storage, waste and other facilities, bike storage, bin storage, for the new dwellings. Okay, but the important first limitation there is the word detached. They say detached in there. Now we come to the restrictions, what you can't do. You can't add these to properties that have been converted by another prior approval right. So classes M, N, O, P, PA and Q, that's retail, sui generis uses, office to resi, P is storage to resi, light industrial to resi and agriculture to resi, are taken out of the game. Can't use those buildings that have already been previously converted. It's self-explanatory. You can't do it. Don't even try. The block itself, the original block, must be 3 stories or better in height. So 2-story blocks are taken out of the game completely. 3 stories or better. The block itself must have been constructed between the 1st of July 1948, the appointed day for planning, and the 5th of March 2018. So you've got a nice big bandwidth of time. That really focuses our attention, doesn't it? Because we're looking at purpose-built blocks, fully detached, built in the 50s, 60s and 70s. I think we're all getting an idea of what the government were looking at when they wrote this PD right. The new stories must be placed on the main part of the building, not a subservient part. So where you have those buildings built in the 80s that have step sections, where you have the main tallest part of the building and then you step down, what the government has done there is said, You can't put it on the step section. That's not part of the main part of the building. Where that step section was done for a reason, they want to preserve that reason. So, has to be on the main part of the building, the tallest, most prominent part. Floor to ceiling heights are restricted. Now, this is the first time we've ever seen a floor to ceiling height restriction in PD. But there are two restrictions in here, not one. The first restriction is at any point your additions cannot have a floor to ceiling height more than 3 meters high. The second restriction says that if you're below that, your floor to ceiling height must not exceed the floor to ceiling height of the floors that live below it. So we've got two restrictions playing against us here. This is a maximum for floor to ceiling height. And because it's an OR trigger, you have to try and find both. The next restriction says that they have to be flats, not houses. Now, don't ask me, I don't know, I'll see loads in the comments, how you build houses on top of a block of flats. They would technically be flats, but I think what they mean by this is duplexes. I think what they're actually talking about is two-storey accommodation, not single-storey accommodation. So, I think by this restriction, they're actually making a sort of vague assertion to two-storey duplex type, but I'm sure that will come out in case law when this starts getting chewed through the planning system. The height of the addition in total above the roof height, not including plant, must not exceed 7 meters. 3.5 meters per floor. However, the next restriction is really interesting. The extended building, not including any additional plant, must not exceed 30 meters in height. Now, if you think about that for a minute, that's going to limit the total height of the building we can search for between 3 stories, as we've already talked about that 3-story cap, bottom cap, and 8 stories as a top cap, okay? The reason for that is if you assume 8 stories, 3 meters per story, or 3 meters is critical because it's 3 meters per story floor to ceiling above, that's going to give you 24 meters in building height, plus an additional 2 stories at 3 meters per story is a 30-meter building, the top cap. So in reality, we've got a bandwidth of buildings we can search for between 3 and 8 stories, assuming 3 meters per floor. Even if you were to assume less, 2.7 per floor, you still come out with 8 because you can't add half a story. You're not allowed to put exoskeletons on the building. So where previously we've added floors by adding an exoskeleton and putting floors supported by the exoskeleton, you cannot do that by this PD right. Clause I specifically says that you're not allowed to put visible support structures on the exterior of the building upon completion of the development. You can't hold up the roof by wrapping it in steel. What you are allowed to, by Class J however, is upgrade the walls and upgrade the foundations and install water, drainage, gas, electricity or other services. Improve, for example, the fire suppression system. You are allowed to do that, but they have to be wholly internal. You're not allowed to put new plant on if there wasn't plant before. Now that's an interesting one, and I'm sure that will start catching out some buildings. So again, if you think about a 3-story building that might not have a lift shaft, the Equalities Act will start to require a lift shaft when you push past 4 stories. That requires plant in the roof or on top of the roof, and you're not allowed to put that plant in as part of this prior approval right because you didn't have plant there before. So that is going to be quite interesting. Again, you can see where the government's going with this. They're going for those taller 1950s, 1960s, 1970s blocks between 3 and 8 stories in height that have plant and machinery on the roof. It's almost like they were looking across from Westminster over to the South Bank in London and saying, yes, we can add stuff to those buildings. Plant has to be replaced on a like-for-like basis. That's Class L or Clause L. Clause M, You're not allowed to stretch the access arrangements beyond the curtilage of the building. You can't stretch into someone else's site. That's sensible. You're not allowed to put waste storage under N beyond the curtilage or in front of the building or in front of a building where it faces the highway. Again, sensible, put it side or rear, not in front. O limits us to Article 2.3 land, that's conservation areas, national parks, the Norfolk Broads, triple SIs, listed buildings, scheduled ancient monuments, safety hazard areas, military explosive areas, or land within 3 kilometres of an aerodrome. Aerodromes being airports, smaller civil air runways, etc., etc., etc. And importantly, military installations come into that. So, O limits the properties. And again, we had a pretty good idea of this. I had a pretty good idea this was going to be coming forward, because why on earth would the government allow 2 stories to be added to a building in a conservation area, for example? Now, this is a prior approval permitted development right coming forward in August. Now, the issues have been added to. Transport, ground contamination, flooding is there. We know that. Air traffic is there. That's that aerodrome thing. If you're near to an aerodrome and it's going to be a problem, say you're near to Farnborough Airport and that's going to be a problem, then the Civil Aviation Authority get involved. External appearance of the building is a consideration. Quite obvious. I'd want you to match. Natural light has been added. Now, natural light is added to every permitted development right by this regulation. Okay, every permitted development right gets natural light. This is the Watford clause, the reaction to approvals being granted where there were no windows for the dwellings, where they came later. And interestingly enough, there are provisions in the interpretation part of the GPDO that says if there is no natural light, refuse it, flatly refuse it. So when you're designing these things, make sure you put windows. And then importantly, we have protected vistas in here for the first time. Protected vistas are those protected views, St Paul's Cathedral, the houses of Westminster, etc., etc. You know you're in a protected vista because it will be in your local plan. You get 3 years to do it. You have to provide a report on the management of the construction of the development as a pre-commencement condition. That includes hours of operation, noise, dust, vibration, etc. How are they to be dealt with? And you have to notify the council when you are reasonably complete. Practical completion is the words used in the GPDO under conditions. Conditions continue. And again, we have a proper removal of PD rights now. So condition 6 requires a proper removal of PD rights. It is only for dwellings. So those thinking, yes, I can add some more HMOs to my block. I'm sorry, that will need planning permission because there is a removal of PD rights in here for those people thinking about it. There's a requirement for proper floor plans, and because they're assessing design, there's a requirement for proper elevations in here in order to deal with those components, light and elevational treatment. You have to give a list of all the addresses for all of the flats within the block. So you have to go and do some homework. Now, I want to just deal with very quickly a couple more things, if I may, as part of this, and I'm sure more will come out as time goes on. The big thing that's in here is in assessing the application, the council must take into account, and there is actually a list now of what the council must take into account, but it is the National Planning Policy Framework only, and not the policies of the local plan. Now that's quite interesting, but permitted development has always bucked policies in the local plan, but here 15B, it says the council must have regard to the National Planning Policy Framework. So we're ignoring policies in the local plan and we're going directly to the NPPF. Very, very interesting. And then finally, there are some definitions, because actually this needs to be defined. And when it comes to light to those habitable rooms, the habitable rooms are identified for us. They are any room intended to be used for sleeping or living, which are not solely used for cooking purposes. So kitchens are out, kitchen diners are in, because that is not solely used for cooking purposes. And it does not include bath or toilet facilities, service rooms, corridors, laundry rooms, hallways, or utility rooms. Gives you an idea. I found going through this tremendously interesting. I hope you found it interesting listening to us. If you have any comments on this, please put them in the comments box. Like, subscribe, of course. Hit the notification bell. I'll see you on the next AntiGuru. Have a very good day. Back in the office for July.